Thank you all for joining us today for our presentation of Better Service Your Constituents Using Digital Public Records Management. We're happy you could join us. Today's presentation will be recorded, so you will be put on mute. My name is Janelle McHugh, and I'd like to start off the presentation with some brief introductions. Our first speaker is Michael Nofel, President of IDT. Michael began his career in DuPage County government and has over 17 years of experience in the information management industry. Over the years, Michael has helped transform and optimize business processes for hundreds of clients and agencies, helping them operate more efficiently while lowering costs. Our second presenter is Terry Jones. Terry worked in state and local government for 13 years prior to joining Hyland Software. She managed and worked in several programs, including CDBG, Home, Main Street, and worked with both community and economic development. She's worked as an IT director deploying agency solution databases, document management, and automation projects. She holds degrees in economics, law, and public policy. Terry uses her public sector experience and her work in information technology to connect trends in government to technology trends and how their interplay impacts the future of the local government. So without further ado, I'll hand the presentation over to Mike.
Thank you, Janelle, for that great introduction. I first want to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy day to join us today to learn how to better service your constituents. As Janelle mentioned, I've been in the information management industry for quite some time, about 17 years. But prior to that, I actually worked for local county government. I was part of the state's attorney's office, the criminal complaints division, for several years. So hopefully I can relate to most of you in terms of what you're going through on a daily basis, some of the challenges you may have around getting your daily tasks done and dealing with or servicing the public and constituents, because I've been in your shoes and I know, what some of those challenges are. And I think that's really a benefit that IDT can bring to you, is based on that experience and some of the other people we have at IDT. We've been able to bring these type of solutions to our many state and local government clients over the years. So again, today we are set. Sorry. Terry, can you advance the slide, please? And then the next one. Thank you. So today we're talking about how to better service your constituents through digital records management. Really, at the end of the day, what we all want is to be able to do our jobs more efficiently with less effort and get better results. We're really searching for new ways to improve our customer service to the many constituents that we have. And that's really the point of today's agenda. I'm going to begin today by talking about some agency needs. Specifically, these are needs that we have identified over the many years of working with our customers, and have really kind of resonated loud and clear in terms of these are the things we need as an agency improve on to better do our job. I'm then going to turn it over to Terry Jones. Terry is going to talk more on these constituency trends from Hyland's perspective. She's also going to fill you in on the reality of what these constituency trends mean in relation to document management. And then we're going to round out by giving 4 steps in the technology you need to improve overall constituency service and provide a better, more efficient way of doing your daily job. Next. So let's begin by talking about what are some trending agency needs. Next. So today's government, we've heard a lot of things from our customers. Wanted to kind of summarize this down for you so you could easily understand. So as far as the first thing, we see more, or we're being asked constantly to get more efficient in our daily routine. The people that we work with in the government, they want to do things better, faster, with less effort because of the pressures that they're routinely under. Budgets are getting slashed, headcounts are frozen or reduced. So we really need a way to get things done in a better, more efficient manner. Number 2, it's really about increasing communication within the agency. And it's not just within the agency itself, that's of course important, but it's across agencies. And that's something that we've seen a trend for in government is, in order to really effectively do your job in today's environment, you need the ability to collaborate and communicate across different departments, because typically the information is really, it spans across many different divisions, and if you don't have a way of communicating or sharing information throughout an entire government body, that puts you at a disadvantage. And finally, what we hear loud and clear is we want ways to better improve our constituency satisfaction. Our agencies that we work with are constantly looking for ways to improve that overall interaction. What we've seen over the years is that the agencies with the greatest needs for records management are highly visible to the public. I'm sure most of these things we're going to talk about you can relate to, if not all of them. But most of the government agencies we work with are highly accountable to the public, and they need, and there's scrutiny in terms of how you interact on a daily basis. There's also a need for significant interaction with other agencies, as I said before. So whenever this is really a factor, you need a records management type solution to be able to facilitate those transactions in an efficient way. High degree of accountability. This is something we've seen more and more of. A lot of the interactions that our agencies we work with are actually governed by statute. So there's actually rules and laws around the amount of time it takes to produce a records request, say like in a FOIA application, or if you need to provide a court document, or anything to do with records management. There is a lot of accountability, which means if you don't have an enterprise content management solution in place, you're putting the organization at risk. And this is especially true for agencies who have large volumes of public records. We see it all the time where agencies in some cases are going back 50, 60 years of managing content, and they need to retain it all. And if you don't have a system in place to manage and control that, again, you put yourself at a disadvantage. So what you don't want to be is that dreaded agency. You know, we all have in our mind, you know, what that particular agency is, that agency that nobody in the public wants to deal with. These are agencies that have antiquated, broken processes. Information is hard to find internally, which translates to externally. It becomes very transparent to the public that you can't find information. And that translates into inconveniences for the public. So these are long wait times to physically go in and request a record and wait and go back and request another record. And it really is a labor-intensive process, not only for the public, but for your staff. Because at the end of the day, you're serving there's people's needs, and if it takes you 5 times longer to do a simple task than it needs to, that's more labor and that's more cost on your side. So what all this really boils down to from the perception of the public is lots of confusion and frustration. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we want to do is provide a more streamlined approach to do your daily job. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to improve service and efficiency. And I think a great way to do that is to start with understanding your constituency in more detail. So without further ado, I'm going to go hand it over to Terry Jones from Hyland.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate the chance to talk about this topic. One of the advantages that I have working for Hyland Software is I travel a lot, and I get to learn a lot about constituent trends, both from thinkers and analysts, from the conversations I have with people that use Hyland software in the public sector, as well as having to do a little bit of research here and there to do these types of conversations where we try to line up constituent trends with technology tools and really offer an opportunity to consider how to go forward. So I would say at the outset, I'm going to apologize for talking to you about constituent trends, because I feel like you're sort of at the center of the tornado, as Michael was talking about. But on the other hand, there have been some interesting studies, and I think the purpose of the next few slides is to talk about what we can get from those studies and how that can guide our technology path. And particularly if you find yourself as someone who might say, I'm less technical, or I don't, in my day-to-day work in government, have a lot of time to manage trends and read about trends. I'm sort of living the dream in the middle of the trends. So this piece is less about telling you what you probably already know and more about framing how you can develop a roadmap to become more efficient, and very particularly how to manage your public records better than you might be doing now. So One of the studies that really sort of grabbed me by the neck late last year was a McKinsey Center for Government Study. The reason for that is they actually had the wherewithal to survey 17,000 people, a luxury that I surely never had when I worked even for state government. And one of the important pieces that came out of that study is overwhelmingly constituents prefer to interact with us online. And this is just part and parcel of everything that's been going on in our society since the iPhone made its appearance and it became so much easier for everybody to get online, possibly even skipping over owning a computer. But there were a few other kernels of truth inside of these findings that are a great framework for our conversation today. So they want us to be more transparent, and that really goes to why our topic today is about public records, which is really the cornerstone of our traditional beliefs about transparency in government. They want things to be accessible, and that probably means something outside of coming to visit our state, city, or county offices. They want services to be responsive, but that's not really surprising. I think the conversation there is what they think responsive means, and we're going to talk about what you can do about that. And of course, expectations rising, which is really, I think, a fact of life. Not anything new, but certainly has implications for us if the only path to meeting these desires is a technology-based path, and I believe it is. They're often frustrated by cumbersome and confusing websites. This is also not a surprise to me because I feel like we've done our websites again and again and again as technology has changed and as expectations have changed, but maybe we haven't always had the most comprehensive plan. And that may have resulted in things being less straightforward than they could be. And then, of course, the most famous moment that I've probably heard my whole professional life in government, and I'm sure you did have as well, is this idea that why do I have to speak with multiple parties to get my question answered? Why do I have to go to multiple agencies? Why do I have to go to multiple departments? Or as they called it in this center survey, the unneeded journey. This is important. Keep that in your mind, the unneeded journey. So when they got through a very long survey, and it's very interesting, you can find it online, what they said, what their advice to you was, they saw the highest rates of constituents to the governmental entities that managed an end-to-end journey for citizen satisfaction. In other words, really quality online services and practices that take people through an entire journey that's not confusing, that is seamless, and that is online and available at their leisure 24/7. So their advice to you is, if you want to enhance constituent satisfaction, you do that online, and you do that by making the online experience work as flawlessly as some of the things that we've come to rely on in the private sector. So, okay, not the first time we've gotten a big mountain of tasks associated with the latest survey about government, but the question of how to start is a valid one, and I think that it's time for us to take a step back and consider the entire citizen journey through our classic government processes, of which accessing public records, making formal public records requests under the laws of your jurisdiction are some of the most obvious examples. So what we're going to talk about for the rest of this conversation today is how to analyze a process and really give you some good ideas to go back to your organization, look at how you're managing your public records, and consider it to be one of the classic citizen or constituent journeys that you need to manage and maybe consider from their point of view to be more efficient and effective and to reduce their frustration with whatever that process is. So when you read the survey, and it's a few hundred pages, one of the things that they talk about is the front-end initiative having the most immediate impact on the citizen experience. This is how the process starts for them. This is the fact that it starts web-based. This may be the fact that it's mobile-friendly. but they really see that things that have that front-end approach are really powerful and most immediate in terms of improving your relationship with your constituents. But the problem with that, in my opinion, is this whole idea that there's a whole lot going on in your world. And when I read surveys and I talk about survey findings, I'm always a little uncomfortable with that because I used to sit in an agency. I did a fair number of public records requests. I was on the Sharpie Brigade, which is code for redacting things after we had stood at the photocopy machine for hours and gone through the files, retrieved files from off-site storage, looked over the files, tried to figure out what files made sense. And of course, none of this is passing the labor of that on to the people that actually want the documents. So this is all something I'm staffing myself. And then there's all the other stuff that's been going on all along in the world of technology, which is things like having to simplify. How do you deploy it fast enough? How do you do this with less staff? How do you do this when you've had to cut? How do you centralize functionality? How do you secure the content and, frankly, secure your networks? Did you have to consolidate amongst agencies or different departments with different IT staff? Now, the reason I bring this up is not to encourage you to have one of those reoccurring nightmares, which I often have as an IT director, about how am I going to balance everything out. This slide is really about saying to you, what if I could meet all of those challenges on the pink slide and I could do something that would meet what the McKinsey Center is trying to tell me, and I could improve my constituent journey, and I could start with public records. There is a way to do this. So how would you move forward to do such a thing? Well, first of all, number one thing is you go paperless. Now, all across everybody that's listening right now, there may be some folks that feel like this is not the most feasible of things to do. You may be thinking a little bit about what the staffing is that would do something like that. You may be asking yourself if you could ever persuade people to do that. And one of the things that's most interesting about that conversation is some of these numbers which we collected in working with the Center for Digital Government. So as you look at number one in green and you see the center, you don't have to persuade anybody about going paperless because 90% of government leaders already think that reducing paper would save their agency money, that it would change process times for typical tasks, and it would help to handle increasing workloads with the same staff, which is my idea of nirvana. Number two, which is in the blue, says 89% of government leaders agree that reducing the amount of paper in daily operations is important, and not the least of which is all the costs that you can eliminate when you do that. As we went on and talked a little bit more, we collected a pretty impressive number, 40%, believing that increased accessibility as it's related to your transparency initiatives or open government hopes and dreams, that's the top advantage of going paperless. And there was a set of other things after that. But people are already recognizing that if you can make public documents available 24/7 through web-based self-service access, or by going paperless, you can change the math from many file cabinets full of paper that I have to search through to one virtual file storage area that I can search once to find everything I need to meet a request. And then, of course, a lot of people recognize, 72%, that if we're reducing paper, we would enable better constituent service across the whole range of things that we have to do in our departments and our agencies, for things like in-office wait times, or even making our field workers more efficient because they could have digital access where paper access isn't always possible when they're working in fieldwork types of activities. So not only do we have people recognizing there's a connection between paper and a lack of transparency, we have people recognizing that maybe if we got rid of the paper, we could take better care of our own employees as well as our constituents. And then one of the things that was really near and dear to my heart when I began the quest to go paperless was this idea of complying with mandates and regulations. And some of the data points we found, actually, I couldn't believe how high this number was, that on average, 260 minutes a day are spent meeting public records requests in our typical agency that's sort of driven by paper. So that includes changing requirements and storage problems. It includes the filing issues and the constituent wait times. It includes the searching and any number of over-the-counter times that people experience. So a significant part of our day, if you can do the math, that's a lot of hours, probably half of our day or more. And then a lot of people are looking at the handling of paper as driving duplicative workflows. In other words, if you look in the middle, that 1,000 minutes a day in an average agency spent copying paper documents is time away from other things, which includes constituent service. It includes deploying technology. It includes the delivery of programs. Almost nothing about photocopying, filing, and printing really helps you with better service delivery for your constituents, but it's taking up a huge amount of our time. So the paper that we're using really does put us in a hole anytime we have to meet new mandates, rising expectations, reduce staff, and reduce budget. So going paperless is a no-brainer, and the good thing is a lot of people already believe that, but they may not know how to do that. So here's a very important piece of it, step 2, which is this idea of walking the constituent journey, this kind of thought that the McKinsey people uncovered to improve how you do this in a world of rising constituent expectations. Well, I have a few thoughts about this, and I've kind of made this into some questions to help you. The first question is about focus and priority. Now, we're talking about public records today because it is one of the most important things in government, in a democracy. But we're also talking about it because it appears to be the journey that matters most to your constituents based on all the people that I've been talking to, the conversations I've had, the number of times that public records and how you manage them and how do you do that in a legal fashion pops up on our conferences that we attend. So what processes and journeys are important? Well, today we're talking about public records as one of those. Now, the very important conclusion or advice that came from the survey was, how would your constituents describe the current experience that they have if they want to access public records? Whether that's an accident report or your agenda in minutes, which is freely available to everybody, or something that follows a more formal public records request, how would they describe that experience right now? And also importantly, because I don't think that deploying technology is just about what it means for the constituent. That's just the way that we get elected and reelected, embarrassed, or have a headline. Your internal staff has to deal with this increasing pressure every day. So it's very important to think through what the internal processes are that shape that journey and how that comes out for the constituent. So how long does the process take? What is the experience of your staff in the public records process? Is there more than one department involved? And there is, and that is always one of the challenges. Can you already see where the bottlenecks are? Do you see extra steps maybe provoked by the fact that you're using paper or multiple copies or something like that? And how are you, maybe as a manager, maybe as someone who has responsibilities for the effectiveness of a public records process, how are you getting reports? What is your level of transparency internally with requests that are flowing through the departments and offices in your organization? Because it's important for you to understand where those requests might be if you have responsibility for the overall process. And then if it is true that they prefer to interact with us online, how are we improving what they call self-service channels in the survey, which is really being able to go to a website and get it done? Are you proactively notifying people? And you know what this is. I buy something from Amazon and they say, thank you, Terry, for your order. They say, we're preparing your order. We've shipped your order. We expect your order. Those are proactive notifications and status updates. Are you using web options to make the request? Have you really pursued these kind of self-service options on your website? Are you finding yourself handling a lot of phone call inquiries? Because there isn't this proactive notification that you can really automate. Are you using already maybe messaging, emails, or other options to kind of acknowledge that someone's put in a request and to notify them as the request is being processed? Because this interactivity, this ability to give the status notifications and updates is part of that rising expectation argument, because we get it all the time. I know when the IRS has accepted my electronic filing, and that's part of proactive notifications. The trouble with that kind of expectation is that if you're not automating that stuff, it becomes just another burden for your staff. That's why looking at the internal process and the tools that you have to support them is so important, because just a front-end initiative may help you with constituents, but if you create a backroom problem, which is typically because you have a lovely web-based front end but a paper-based back end, then what you're doing is just putting more pressure on your staff, because you've raised the expectation of constituents by having a great new web front end without putting the tools in place to manage the end-to-end journey, as we're talking about. And so there's a lot of conversations about availability, usability, and accessibility of information, and that really goes so if you put yourself in that place and you start to ask some of those questions, then the next step is how to apply the technology and what those technology tools need to be. So at the outset, I would say this is not a conversation that's heavily technical or really even very software driven. It's more about capabilities and functionalities, and if I were in your position, maybe as not an IT director, I would be asking these questions as we look at various technology tools, as we look at web initiatives, as we think about how to replace paper. So first of all, I'm going to talk about 6 process points to consider, and I think that they make sense given the kind of preliminary conversation we had about constituent trends and some of the challenges. So first of all, how does the process start? Well, we've already talked about this. You need to start the process of public records and probably any number of government services on your website. You may already be making certain types of forms available on your website, but if you want to increase efficiency and have that seamless end-to-end constituent moment, you need to replace the paper forms with electronic forms, because the paper form requires maybe a download, you have to fill it in, you have to mail it, you have to fax it, you have to carry it in. That is not a seamless constituent journey. And eventually they're going to say, well, why aren't you like this or that? Because their expectations are high. And then, very importantly, to consider designing the forms with mobile in mind, because we see much more mobile uses than we ever have before, and it's very possible that that will be the way people want to engage with you and start the process. The second thing, and you'll notice that this box is blue, so when we look at these couple slides about process points to consider, the green points are really facing out towards your constituents. The blue points are about that internal journey and how we improve our internal process to support what we would like our constituents to have as services. So work assignment is really important, because I would argue that one of the biggest delays in government in terms of a process is how fast the work gets assigned and someone begins to do it. I would argue that, secondly, a very important problem for managers is understanding if the work has been assigned and if people are undertaking the task that they need to do for that work. So using a workflow tool, and by that I mean automating getting work to people and notifying them that they have new work or new tasks to do. Being able to use a dashboard if assignment is important. So if it is your job to receive the public records request, how do you parcel out that work for people when the request may span several departments, which is fairly common? And then how do you have automated notifications and timers so that you can keep that process on track, or even more importantly, in compliance with any sort of legal timeframes that you have for fulfilling a public records request? These are possible when you go paperless, because you will now have automation get assigned. And then as someone who will be managing the process, the progress tracking is something that goes both ways. So that same dashboard that you might be using internally can also be exposed to the constituents through things like portals that might have its own dashboard that they are receiving through the workflow automation that we're talking about, notifications that tell them when something is moving through a process, so progress tracking. And then one of the things that I think is really important and underappreciated is how we collaborate to fulfill requests. Michael kind of tipped this in his early comments about the challenges of fulfilling public records requests, which almost always go across several departments, because the public doesn't really ask us, like, what department or this department. They have a topic, and a topic that they want records on usually requires the work of a lot of us in government. And so one of the most important pieces of being able to go paperless and using something like enterprise content management to manage your records is that there's a single repository to search. It's also important when you're trying to figure out which document that you find is actually the record. And it is not uncommon for us to have multiple versions of a document in government as we collaborate and work together. So if you move to a digital world and a paperless world, you can have a single repository, you can have simultaneous access to a document, you can collaborate on that document, and you can track the revisions and versions to ensure the record that is in your archive is the record, that you have the final stamped, and that's your public record. So that collaboration that's essential, the idea that you can find a document and do what's known as a federated search across many areas to come up with a full and comprehensive public records request package is really related to this ability to have a single repository, and it really does support the collaboration you need generally as we work together on projects. The status updates are part of making people aware of where you are in the fulfillment process and having that come in the way that makes the most sense for them. So I'm sure you have met a lot of people who have only been with us during the time when there was always an internet and maybe really kind of grew up with phones and text messages and that kind of thing. So being able to automate the notification process through emails, text, or even a portal online that people can log into and see the status of requests makes a lot of sense, because again, that's going to be the expectation of that constituent that we've been talking about. So how are you going to have status updates? Well, you automate that process along with the general workflow to fulfill public records, and you're able to do that through a web-based solution that can serve up public records and process those requests. And then finally, this is a more general category, I think, in a lot of ways, but we have a lot of correspondence in government, and we have to be able to create the correspondence and deliver the correspondence. And I would offer that these same constituents that we've been talking about expect us to do this by email. They expect it to do this by text, maybe a portal. Maybe there's a portal that you go and you can download a digital version of a letter. But this, in my experience, is a tremendous amount of work to manage these requests. And so if you're in a community where there's been some sort of controversial topic and you're really overwhelmed by the public records request, being able to automate notifications at the end of the process, automating the creation of the public records packet and delivering that back out to people and having a complete audit trail to know when that happened and when it was delivered makes a lot of sense because it relieves a lot of staff correspondence, and it also builds a really unassailable audit trail of fulfilling that request in a timely fashion. So that decision point when the process is complete is very important, and you can automate any number of those pieces if you go paperless. So those are kind of the 6 process points to think about, and they're informed by what constituents are expecting, what trends we're observing, what efficiencies we've identified or inefficiencies we've identified. So the next step for you is to buy the right platform. And having had a pretty free-flowing conversation about different aspects of the public records process, and there's a lot of government processes that could fit into this framework, I wanted to give you a checklist of functionality. So as you think through what you want to do to meet these expectations and trends, you can really give yourself a list to work with. Maybe you go to your IT department and talk about this. Maybe you examine the tools you already have. So first of all, you've got to have tools that work with your website. So no matter what solution you're buying, its place and how it fits into your web front end, how you're going to offer services to your constituents has to be considered, as well as tools that allow you to do that and deliver it on mobile devices and tablets. You need to consider electronic forms because we need to start these processes electronically. We need to get rid of paper forms to make that happen, and we need to get rid of paper forms to realize these efficiencies. We really need a dashboard internally to have the transparency that we need as managers to be sure that we're meeting our constituents' expectations. We need workflow to automate this because we are working with smaller staff, and we need things to happen, and we need things to remind us, and we need things to prioritize for us, because that way we don't have to worry about things going through the cracks. And by using workflow automation with digital documents and content flowing through them, we have a way to see where something is in a process, if we have to answer a question or if we have to let the requester know what the status is. We need a digital repository to replace paper and filing cabinets for all the reasons related to all the numbers that we talked about earlier. We need electronic notifications and timers. Many of us have legal requirements or time frames that we need to have, or at least a legal standard like reasonable time period for fulfilling public records requests. And we really need to have the ability to automate correspondence creation, storing that, and also how we do the delivery of that so that we can do it in a format that makes sense for our constituents, but really have it in an automated way so we're not asking our staff to type letter after letter after letter, as was so often the case in my career. So buying the right platform is important. And of course, I'm here because I work for Hyland Software, and we make software called OnBase. One of the most important things about this diagram is the idea of the central repository and the basic problem of public records. If you look at this diagram and you see those 4 circles in each corner of your screen, you are thinking of all the locations in your overall organization that store documents in file cabinets that might be susceptible to a public records request, or maybe documents that you have an obligation to provide to the public. And you are looking at numerous places that you would have to search if someone made a request that really spans multiple departments. You're also looking at a number of solutions that people use OnBase for. That centerpiece that's really the pillars of government is meant to symbolize the idea that all of those solutions and all of those documents, all that content, everything that is a public record or is a record you have to manage can be in a single repository, secured and easy to search, easy to automate, and easy to transform the constituent experience, that journey that we talked about, into something that's pleasant and fast, both for the constituent and for your internal staff. And you do that by buying the right platform, and a platform that can provide all of these solutions while holding all this content in one place. So, with that being said, I'm hoping that you want to learn more. Michael?
Thank you, Terry.
Perfect.
Go ahead, Janelle.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Thank you so much, Terry. That concludes our webinar. So I'd like to thank our presenters and participants again. If you have any additional questions, I'd be happy to address those offline. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with our contact information. Have a great rest of your day.